High in the mountains east of the Sierra Nevada, there's a town that once ran almost entirely on gold. Today it stands silent. Weathered wooden buildings lean slightly in the dry air. Empty streets stretch between old saloons, shops, and boarding houses. Wind moves slowly through broken fences and dusty windows. This is Bodie. In the late 1870s and early 1880s, Bodie was not quiet at all. It was one of the richest mining towns in the American West. At its peak, thousands of miners, merchants, and families lived there. The hills surrounding the town were filled with shafts, mills, and tunnels that processed ore day and night. Gold was everywhere in Bodie's early years. The mines produced millions of dollars in gold from quartz veins running through the mountains. Stamp mills pounded ore into powder. Wagons carried heavy loads of rock down steep roads toward processing plants. Every week, shipments of refined gold left the town. From the outside, Bodie looked unstoppable. The mines were still producing. The town was still growing, and the ground beneath the hills still held gold. Yet something strange happened. Within a few decades, miners stopped digging. Companies closed operations. Shafts were abandoned. Equipment was dismantled or left behind. The town that once depended entirely on gold slowly emptied. But here is the question that still puzzles historians and visitors today. Why did miners stop digging in Bodie if the gold was still there? Because in many of the mines surrounding the town, the story was not one of exhausted deposits. It was something else entirely. The discovery that eventually created Bodie began years before the town reached its peak. In 1859, a small group of prospectors were exploring the mountains near what is now the California-Nevada border. Among them was a man named William S. Bodie. While searching the hills, they found promising gold-bearing quartz. The discovery did not immediately create a boom. The location was remote, high in elevation, and difficult to reach during winter months. But the ore was real. Over the following years, small mining operations slowly appeared in the area. Shafts were sunk into the hills. Companies began to form. Investors recognized that the quartz veins running beneath the mountains could hold large quantities of gold. By the mid-1870s, larger discoveries changed everything. One of the most important mines in the district was the Standard Mine. When miners struck a rich section of the vein, production increased dramatically. Word spread quickly across California and Nevada. Prospectors arrived. Investors arrived. Speculators arrived. Within a few years, Bodie transformed from a small mining camp into a booming town. By 1880, the population was estimated at around 7,000 people. More than 60 saloons operated along the main streets. Dozens of mines surrounded the town, each sending ore to massive stamp mills that crushed rock day and night. The gold veins beneath the hills were thick and profitable, at least for a while. Because quartz mining is very different from the river mining that defined the early days of the California gold rush. Gold in quartz veins does not sit loose in gravel. It is locked inside rock, and reaching it requires digging deeper and deeper underground. For a time, Bodie's mines were willing to follow those veins wherever they led. But eventually, the deeper they dug, the harder the decisions became. Unlike the rivers that fueled the early years of the California gold rush, the gold around Bodie did not lie loose in gravel. It was trapped inside quartz. That meant miners were not simply washing sediment in pans or rocker boxes. They were cutting directly into the mountains, following narrow veins of white quartz that ran through darker volcanic rock. At first, those veins were incredibly rich. Chunks of quartz pulled from the upper levels of the mine sometimes carried visible gold. When crushed in Bodie's massive stamp mills, the ore released enough gold to make the mines extremely profitable. For a time, the system worked perfectly. Miners blasted rock underground, or carts rolled along timbered tunnels. The ore was lifted to the surface and transported to stamp mills, where heavy iron stamps pounded it into powder. From there, chemical processes separated the gold from the crushed stone. Each ton of ore could produce significant returns. The Standard Mine became one of the most productive operations in the district, helping turn Bodie into a town of wealth and reputation. But quartz mining has one rule that every miner eventually faces. The deeper you follow a vein, the more difficult and expensive the work becomes. Tunnels must be reinforced with timber. Water begins to flood lower levels. Ventilation becomes a constant problem, and every foot of depth increases the cost of extracting each ton of rock. At the surface, gold veins can look incredibly promising. Deep underground, those same veins can narrow, fracture, or simply become harder to reach. By the early 1880s, Bodie's mines were already facing the reality that every successful quartz district eventually encounters. Gold was still present, but reaching it was becoming more complicated. At first, investors believed Bodie's mines could keep producing for decades. The early numbers looked encouraging. The mines around the town had already produced millions of dollars in gold. The veins seemed stable. New shafts were opened to explore deeper sections of the mountains. But the deeper miners went, the more the economics began to shift. Quartz mining is capital intensive. Unlike placer mining, where a single prospector could operate with basic tools, underground mining required organized companies, large crews, and expensive infrastructure. Every expansion meant new tunnels, more timber, larger pumps to remove water, and increasingly powerful equipment. Stamp mills had to run constantly to remain profitable. Transportation costs were high because Bodie sat at high elevation in a harsh climate. Winters were long. Snow sometimes blocked supply routes for weeks. Even when gold remained in the rock, extracting it had to make financial sense. And by the mid-1880s, some mines began to notice something troubling. The ore was still there, but the concentration of gold within each ton of rock was slowly declining. That meant miners had to process more ore to produce the same amount of gold. More blasting, more hauling, more crushing, more chemicals. Costs rose, margins shrank. Investors started asking difficult questions. If deeper mining required massive investment and each ton of ore contained slightly less gold than before, how long would it remain profitable? For a while, Bodie's mines pushed forward anyway. But every additional level underground brought the district closer to the moment when the answer would change everything. Because sometimes a mine does not close when the gold runs out. Sometimes it closes when the math stops working. By the late 1880s, the mines surrounding Bodie were still producing gold. That part of the story is important. This was not a sudden collapse caused by empty rock. The veins beneath the hills had not disappeared overnight. Ore was still being hauled from underground tunnels, crushed in stamp mills, and processed for gold. But the numbers were changing. Early in a mine's life, the richest sections are often found near the surface or along easily accessible parts of the vein. Those areas deliver high returns relative to the effort required to reach them. As mining progresses, companies must follow the remaining vein deeper into the mountain. Deeper mining brings new challenges. Water seeps into lower tunnels and must be pumped out constantly. Timber supports must be installed to prevent collapses. Ventilation shafts must move air through increasingly complex networks of tunnels. Each of these problems has a cost, and when the concentration of gold in the ore begins to decline even slightly, the balance between effort and reward starts to shift. In Bodie's district, some mines found that the ore still contained gold, but less of it per ton of rock than in early years. That meant more blasting, more hauling, more crushing, all for the same result. Investors began calculating how far the mines could reasonably continue. and those calculations were becoming less optimistic. The men working underground did not usually decide when a mine would close. That decision was made far away from the tunnels. Mining companies that operated the major claims around Bodie were financed by investors, many of them living hundreds of miles away in cities like San Francisco. To those investors, the mines were not just geological formations. They were businesses. Every year, company managers sent reports describing production levels, operating costs, and projections for future exploration. Shareholders expected returns. Directors expected profits. And as the mines grew deeper and more expensive to operate, the reports began to change tone. Instead of describing spectacular strikes, they increasingly discussed maintenance costs, pumping systems, and the need for further investment to continue deeper exploration. Continuing to mine required new capital. New capital meant risk. Some investors were willing to fund deeper shafts in the hope that richer ore would appear again. Others were not. Gradually, certain companies began to scale back operations. Equipment was removed from less productive shafts. Workers were reassigned or dismissed. Production continued in some mines, but the overall district began to slow. The change did not happen overnight, but once investors started withdrawing confidence, the future of Bodie's mining operations became uncertain. Because gold in the ground does not automatically mean profit on the surface. And in mining districts across the American West, the moment when investors lose confidence often arrives long before the gold itself is truly gone. By the early 1890s, the change in Bodie was becoming visible. The mines had not all closed at once. A few operations were still running, and some shafts continued producing ore. But the intensity that had once defined the town was fading. During Bodie's peak years, stamp mills thundered day and night. Hundreds of miners worked underground shifts while wagons carried ore constantly through the streets toward processing plants. Now, fewer wagons rolled down those roads. Some mills ran less frequently. A few shafts were sealed or simply abandoned where they stood. Mining districts rarely collapse in a single dramatic moment. Instead, they slow gradually. Production declines. Investors shift their attention elsewhere. Workers leave for newer discoveries in other regions. The same thing began happening in Bodie. Prospectors started hearing rumours about opportunities in different districts across the West. Mining companies began exploring new fields where ore grades appeared stronger and operating costs lower. As that shift happened, Bodie's population began to shrink. A town that once held thousands of residents slowly lost businesses, families, and workers. Houses emptied, shops closed, streets that once stayed active late into the night grew quiet. The mines were still there, the tunnels still reached deep into the mountains, and the quartz veins beneath them still contained gold. But the momentum that had driven the town forward was fading. Modern geological studies of the Bodie mining district suggest something important about those abandoned mines. The gold was not completely exhausted. Quartz veins rarely behave like a switch that suddenly turns off. Instead, ore grades fluctuate. Some sections of a vein are rich, others lean, and deeper levels may contain additional deposits that early mining technology never reached. Many of the mines around Bodie stopped operating not because every ounce of gold had been removed, but because continuing deeper exploration required enormous investment. To follow the veins further underground would have required larger pumping systems, more powerful hoisting equipment, and new infrastructure capable of supporting deeper tunnels. By the end of the 19th century, the financial enthusiasm that once fueled Bodie had moved elsewhere. New mining districts were emerging. Investors preferred fresh opportunities rather than funding deeper and more uncertain exploration in an aging camp. So the mines closed. Timber supports remained underground, or carts sat where they were last used. Shafts that once connected complex networks of tunnels were sealed or left to collapse slowly over time. But beneath the hills surrounding Bodie, the quartz veins remained, and inside those veins, gold still existed locked inside rock that miners had once decided was no longer worth chasing. Estimating how much gold remained beneath Bodie is difficult. Mining records from the district show that Bodie's mines produced tens of millions of dollars in gold during their most productive years. Some estimates suggest the total value of gold extracted from the region exceeded $30 million in 19th century currency. That alone made Bodie one of the most successful mining districts in California after the earliest years of the California Gold Rush. But production records also show something else. Very few mines in the district were followed to extreme depths. In many cases, operations stopped once ore grades declined to a point where investors were unwilling to fund further exploration. Shafts that had already reached impressive depths for their time still left large volumes of surrounding rock unexplored. Quartz veins do not always disappear when grades decline. Sometimes they continue deeper into the mountain, narrowing and widening unpredictably. In other districts across the American West, mines that appeared nearly exhausted later revealed richer deposits at greater depths once new technology made deeper mining possible. Whether the same potential existed beneath Bodie's hills remains uncertain. What is clear is that the closing of the mines was driven primarily by economics rather than complete geological exhaustion. In other words, the mine stopped producing not necessarily because the gold had vanished, but because reaching it no longer made financial sense at the time. This distinction is important. Exhausted mines are places where the valuable material has truly been removed. The rock remaining underground holds little or no economic value. Abandoned mines are different. They are places where valuable deposits may still exist, but were left behind because the cost, technology, or risk required to reach them became too great. Many historians and geologists consider parts of the Bodie district closer to the second category. The miners who worked the tunnels beneath the town followed the veins as far as their resources allowed. When production declined and investment slowed, the companies operating the mines made a decision. Stop digging. Remove equipment. Move capital elsewhere. The tunnels remained. The rock remained. And the gold locked inside that rock remained as well. Even today, strict preservation laws protect the historic structures and mining sites of Bodie, which is maintained as a California State Historic Park. Those protections mean the mines themselves are not reopened for modern exploration. So whatever gold may still exist in the deeper veins beneath the town will likely remain exactly where it has been for more than a century. Walking through the empty streets of Bodie today feels almost frozen in time. Buildings still stand where miners once lived. Rusted equipment remains scattered around old mill sites. The landscape surrounding the town still shows the scars of shafts, tailings, and tunnels carved into the hills. It is easy to assume that when a gold town becomes a ghost town, the gold must have disappeared first. In Bodie's case, the story appears more complicated. The town declined because the economics of mining changed. Costs increased, investors lost interest, and attention shifted to new discoveries elsewhere in the West. Yet the veins that once made Bodie famous did not simply vanish. They remain part of the mountains beneath the town. Gold still exists inside the quartz that miners once chased through dark tunnels beneath those hills. And because Bodie is now preserved as a historic site, much of that underground world will likely never be explored again. Which leaves us with the same question that miners faced more than a century ago. Was Bodie truly exhausted? Or did miners simply stop digging too soon? Because sometimes a town doesn't die when the gold runs out. Sometimes it dies when people decide it is no longer worth trying to reach it.